We're going to get started. Welcome everyone to the International Collaborative Research Program, the third Osaka University and UC Berkeley joint international symposium on investigation of socio-economic factors associated with successful assisted living in Japan and the United States. My name is Winston Tseng, and I'm with UC Berkeley School of Public Health. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to collaborate on this symposium. And as we get started, I want to introduce Professor and Dean Kei Kamide of the Division of Health Sciences to please come up and give his welcome remarks. I'm really grateful for Professor Kamide to host us here at Osaka University today. Professor Kamide?
Good morning in Osaka, Japan. Good evening in California, USA, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for participating in Osaka University and UC Berkeley's third joint International Collaborative Symposium 2023. This joint symposium is a week of international collaborative research program between Health Science Division of Osaka University Graduate School of Medicine and School of Public Health, UC Berkeley, started from 2020. This collaborative research program title is Investigation of Socio-Economic Factors Associated with Successful Assisted Living in Japan and the United States. For about recent 2 years, we could not invite professors from UC Berkeley due to the influence of the COVID-19 pandemic. After 2 years of fighting against COVID-19 virus and progress in vaccines, we are finally able to welcome UC Berkeley professors. So we are very happy that such a wonderful collaborative symposium in person is held today. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to everyone involved both in Division of Health Science, Osaka University Graduate School of Medicine, and UC Berkeley School of Public Health. This event is supported by the grant Osaka University's International Joint Research Promotion Program, Support Type A. We appreciate very much for this support. Healthy aging is the most important theme both in Japan and the United States and all over the world. Every people with healthy aging has a decline of physical and cognitive function by aging. Therefore, we must think about the long-term care to realize the wellness of assisted living in future of healthy aging. For such a successful assisted living, socio-economic factors are thought to be very important. We have been collaborating with professors in UC Berkeley for past 2 years to solve these issues. Today, we will hold a symposium focusing on the presentation of research achievement for 3 years program by graduate students from both universities and design thinking innovative solution to complex health problems. I believe this final symposium and achievement of this collaborative research program will be very useful and informative for healthy aging and to realize the long-term care for the successful assisted living. Please enjoy the symposium today. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, Professor Kamide. Next, it's really my pleasure to welcome Director and Professor Scott North of Osaka University North American Center for Academic Initiatives to give his welcome remarks. Professor Scott? Professor Scott.
Thank you very much, Winston. Good morning to everyone in Japan, and good afternoon to participants in California. I am Scott North, the director of Osaka University's North American Center for Academic Initiatives. Our U.S. office is in Berkeley, just outside the Berkeley BART station. We have a local staff person who keeps an eye on things there. Most of the time, however, I am here in Japan, and I travel to the US several times each year. After nearly 3 years of travel limitations, it's really wonderful to have professors saying Mas and Newhouser here on our campus from the University of California, Berkeley School of Public Health. And I'm glad to see that they're able to continue the collaboration that they began in 2019. It is hardly necessary to point out that Japan and the US have very different healthcare systems, but they face very similar threats to public health. These include pandemics, climate change, corrosive social inequalities, population aging, and associated chronic diseases. As advanced and increasingly post-industrial societies, and as long-term geostrategic allies, collaboration between Japanese and US public health researchers is inherently desirable. Osaka University is keen to establish institutional level international agreements through which to regularize research cooperation and exchanges. These agreements must be faculty driven. And so on behalf of Vice President Kawahara of our Center for Global Initiatives, it gives me great pleasure to welcome scholars and students from UC Berkeley's School of Public Health, especially those of you who are joining us today remotely. I know that in addition to Doctors Hamide and Kabayama and their students in the School of Allied Health Sciences, you've also been working with some of my former colleagues in the Graduate School of Human Sciences. I'm sure that there are also faculty in the School of Medicine, in immunology, in frontier biosciences, and in other departments who would be very interested in joining in your work. I sincerely hope that this symposium and others like it will stimulate collaborative research projects and grant proposals, and I look forward to learning from today's presentations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor North, for your welcome remarks. Next, for the symposium, we have 3 different sessions. The first is the research achievement reports, and the second is a special lectures by invited professors from UC Berkeley, and then the third session is joint discussion. We're going to get started with the first session on research achievement reports, and I want to welcome the moderators for session 1, Dr. Linda Newhouser and Dr. Marlon Mouse with the School of Public Health at UC Berkeley. Linda, Marlon, please come up.
Well, good morning. We are so glad to be here, finally, after 3 years, and get to see you face to face. So we're going to have a very interesting session right now where we're going to hear from the students who are doing really important research that we need globally. So, Marlon?
Yes, and just to echo everybody else's mention, after a small pandemic, which prevented us from being here 2-3 years ago, we're very happy to finally make it. And yes, we are going to start now with the first session. And Linda, you mentioned the first two.
So our first student, we're going to do a move. So all you folks at UC Berkeley can watch us. I want to welcome our first student, who is Yuko Nakamura. And she is a doctoral student at Osaka University. She will be talking about her research, which is serum lipids as a risk factor in older age. And this will be from the SONIC study.
So good morning, everyone. It is a great honor to be able to speak here. The purpose of my presentation is to explain the association between serum lipid levels and disease in community dwelling older adults. Today, I've divided my talk into two parts. I'm going to start with a brief explanation of cholesterol and diseases. Then I move on to my research topics focused on lipid and disorders in older age from the SONIC study. This time, I'm going to share my results on two issues, cardiovascular diseases and cognitive decline. Okay, let's begin. As many of you already know that dyslipidemia is one of the most common diseases worldwide. Too much lipid level is harmful and can be a risk of brain and heart diseases and dementia for older adults. This graph shows statistics on dyslipidemia and related diseases in Japan. You can see there are a certain number of people with high LDL from the line graph on the left. The right-sided graph shows patients with ischemic heart disease. Although the number has decreased over the years, there are still patients and the risk increases with age. And you can see dementia accounts for about 20% of the need for long-term care. Of course, lipid control is helpful for prevention. However, lipid-lowering treatment for older patients can be complicated, and still many things are unknown. Therefore, I examined those two crucial diseases. So let's move on to my research on atherosclerotic diseases. This is the background. The study examines the association between LDL, HDL, and TG, and disease for those 75 years and older are limited. The Utopia study provided powerful evidence for lipid management in the older population. However, it lacks external validity because it was a randomized controlled trial. Therefore, epidemiological studies are required for community dwelling older adults with a wide variety of conditions. So I set the objective to assess the relationship prospectively between lipid and atherosclerotic diseases. This study is a longitudinal analysis of a prospective cohort study called the SONIC study. This has been ongoing since 2010. We collected data from 70-year-olds in 2010, from 80-year-olds in 2011, 90-year-olds in 2012 to form the baseline survey. We studied follow-up surveys from 2013. This is the methodology. 1,432 participants fulfilled inclusion criteria. Abnormal lipid levels were diagnosed as LDL more than 140, TG more than 150, or HDL less than 40. The outcome events were atherosclerotic diseases, including cerebral infarction, transient ischemic attack, and ischemic heart disease. Logistic regression was performed. So I divided the SONIC study subjects into two groups, one in their 70s and the other in their 80s to 90s, and examined their baseline lipid and disease development during 3-year follow-up. This shows the baseline profile. As you can see, cholesterol levels decrease as they age. During the follow-up period, 25 participants developed the disease in the 70-year-old group and 20 in the other group. This table is about those who have the disease incidence. It shows that many have low HDL and high TG compared to the average of all. This logistic regression shows that low HDL was a significant disease risk. On the other hand, there was no relationship between LDL and disease. Frankly speaking, I am not sure why TG did not show a difference in the 70s group. In a previous study, low HDL is a disease risk in Japanese people aged 39 to 75. Of course, I have to mention that the results does not indicate that LDL is not associated with a disease. However, it suggests that HDL plays an important role in disease prevention in older adults over 70s. Then let's look at the relationship to cognitive function. Background. Hypertension and dyslipidemia often coexist, and these lifestyle-related diseases can cause vascular abnormalities and can be a risk for cognitive dysfunction. However, consistent conclusions have yet to be reached in older patients. Objective is to consider the 3-year longitudinal effect of hypertension, dyslipidemia, this combination, and other risk factors on cognitive decline in individuals 70 to 90 years of age. This is the inclusion criteria. Baseline blood pressure and lipid were used as descriptive variables. Hypertension and dyslipidemia were defined as follows based on each criterion. The outcome is a MoCA-J score after 3 years. MoCA measures cognitive function and is said to be more sensitive than the MMSE. Higher scores mean more excellent cognitive function. First, the total subject population was examined, then divided into groups, those with combined hypertension and dyslipidemia, those with hypertension only, those with dyslipidemia only, and the rest. This is a characteristic of the subject at the baseline in each group. I apologize that you cannot see some numbers. More than half of those with hypertension and 30 to 40% of those with dyslipidemia were receiving medication. This multi-regression shows that high HDL and DBP at baseline correlated significantly with the MoCA-J as the follow-up time in the hypertension and dyslipidemia group. In the hypertension group, SDP at baseline was associated with MoCA-J. In this study, we found the relationship between a higher HDL, DBP, and SDP and a higher score of MoCA-J. Several studies have shown that low HDL may contribute to Alzheimer's disease and atherosclerosis. In addition, recent findings suggested that hypertension-related cognitive impairment involves skills other than memory, and our study used MoCA-J total score and did not analyze subscores. These things may affect the current results. These studies directly support our findings. Low HDL and BP as a risk for cognitive decline is our new finding. We have seen the results of 2 studies, but of course, there are some limitations. Here is a summary of these 2 studies. Low HDL was a risk for atherosclerotic disease and cognitive decline. Therefore, we recommend that lipid-lowering treatment should carefully be done for the older population over 70 years of age from the point of view of preventing these disorders. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions,
Thank you very much for the presentation, Yuko. And we have some time for a few questions. Can everyone hear okay? That's better. Okay, so Yuko, that was a very fascinating presentation, very important research that all of us can use. I want to start off with a question I have, and that is, how could we increase HDL in older adults? And I'm not assuming that you know the answer to this or anyone does, but I would like to put that question out for you or anybody else who's here and might have an idea about how to do that.
Actually, I believe that increasing HDL is super difficult, especially for older adults. Maybe having healthy diets and good exercise habit is a good way to keep your HDL level, and try not to decrease the HDL level is important. It's
Okay, that is very important observation. Drink more wine, eat the Osaka diet, which is very healthy, And we thank you very much for this groundbreaking research. I think all of us will be able to think about this in the future.
And just one more quick comment. The importance of this study is really, it's extreme, because one of the things we have to realize is that billions of dollars are spent on drugs to try to bring down lipids. And this is just one more proof that after a certain age, the importance of doing that is really questionable. So this is, thank you for a really important contribution. So for our next presenter, we have Naoko Murakami, who's a student, a doctoral student here at Osaka University. And the topic is actual conditions for returning home after hospitalization among older patients receiving home medical care, the OHCARE O-Care study. Now, I guess she's here.
Hi, Gary. Okay, I will start. Sorry, it's a great honor to be able to speak with you today. Thank you. Let me start with the background. The future of care is changing from hospital-based to a community-based system. This will place a large challenge on both home medical care and nursing care. Understanding the characteristics of home medical care patients who are likely to require acute care is important for predicting their prognosis. Therefore, it's considered necessary to clarify the actual situation of older patients receiving home medical care who were able to return to home. So let's look at the objective of this study. So the purpose of this study is to examine the condition for older patients receiving home medical care after hospitalization. I will now discuss the method we use. The data for this study was taken by the participants of O-Care study. O-Care study is a prospective cohort study which includes older patients receiving home medical care. We surveyed from 6 months to a year follow-up and collected information from medical records from 9 research corporation institutions in Osaka and Hyogo, Japan. Let's move on to patient selection. This shows the selection of participants. Age under 65 and non-follow-up criteria groups are excluded. In addition, we also excluded participants who had not been hospitalized with acute care at any time during 2-year follow-up. As the final outcome during the follow-up period, the analysis was conducted by dividing the patients into 2 groups based on whether they were able to return back home or not. Let's look at these 2 groups in more detail. In this study, the operational definition of the term returning to home was defined as older patients who were able to return to their original home or nursing home after discharge from the hospital. In the case where patients went from home to another nursing home, or if they passed away in the hospital, then they were considered in the second group, non-return to home. The analysis method and the software are as following. So let's look at the result of this study. This table is participants' baseline characteristics. Although no significant association were found in any all groups. The median age of all groups was 80 years or older, and the proportion of patients with dyslipidemia was higher in the returning to home group, while the proportion of patients with dementia and cardiac disease was higher and in the returning to home group. About nursing care and social resources, no significant difference was found. However, about severe care need, high bedridden or had a high level of dementia independence, there was a larger proportion in the non-returning to home group. In addition, in the returning to home group, there is a larger proportion of desire related to end of life in their medical records. About laboratory data and blood pressure, there was no significant association. However, a higher rate of hyperglycemia was seen in the non-returning to home group. In addition, about clinical events during the two follow-up period, the non-returning to home group had significantly more deaths and tend to have more fails. Here is look at the diseases caused hospitalization during the follow-up period. In the returning to home group, more than 40% of hospitalization was triggered by infections such as pneumonia, fever, and so on. In the non-returning to home group, around 40% of hospitalization were triggered by infections such as pneumonia, fever, and so on. Let's look at the discussion of this study. Having low nutrition may have easily prevented the patient from returning to home, and the remaining descriptions of end of life may have influenced in supporting the patient return to home. The present results are consistent with previous studies, although no significant associations were found. Also, the number of cases analysis was relative. It's possible aging had an effect on the number of hospitalizations due to pneumonia, fever, and other infections in this study. The higher severity of diseases such as pneumonia and heart failure in patients who had difficulty returning to home may have also affected the prognosis. In this study, we use reliable data, including the older patients. However, in some of the cases, detailed progress during hospitalization was known. Conclusion: in older patients who had difficulty returning to home after hospitalization, low nutrition status and the lack of remaining statement of desire regarding end of life issues may have influenced the results. So we would like to express our deep gratitude to everyone who cooperated in OKR study. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions for our presenter today? I have a question. One of the issues that you looked at is this family support, the availability of family support as an important determinant about whether they could go home, back home or not. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? In what way do you think that provided a support for return to home?
Thank you for your question for my study. However, sorry, I couldn't understand what you said. So you mentioned to me about the family support was analyzed in my study.
Right, exactly.
Thank you so much. So I only could in this study. We analyzed only about living with family or not, or other living style such as nursing home. So, however, thanks to your idea, so I will have to analyze that or write another data I have to use for my next study analyzing. Thank you so much. I will try to have.
Well, we're looking forward to your next study. Yes, Linda, any questions?
Yes, I have a question too. I was very interested in how the study that you did and the study that Yuko did might have something in common. So you mentioned dyslipidemia as being one of the factors that was significant. And I wondered if you had information about LDL versus HDL. You may not have that, but if you do, that could be very interesting to explore.
Thank you so much, Professor Linda. And so I will reply to first question. So maybe about cholesterol score. So okay, however, sorry, I didn't analyze about the cholesterol score or types of laboratory data. I couldn't only analyze about albumin score, total protein score, or hemoglobin score. So I will try analyze the data of that. Thank you so much for your comment. Very useful comment. And second comment is sorry, I couldn't catch up your recommend comment. Second question.
I only have that one question.
Sorry, thank you so much.
Yes.
I couldn't understand well. Thank you so much.
Well, we are looking forward to your next study results. And Yuko too, this just shows how one study can affect another study in a very important way. For all of us have to think about what both of you said today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will try.
Okay, thank you very much. And I am now pleased to welcome Yuka Ohata. She is a doctoral student also at Osaka University and will be talking to us about the association between skeletal muscle mass and blood pressure decline over a 5-year period for community dwelling older adults. Welcome, Yuka.
Thank you for your introduction. My name is Yuka Ohata, doctoral student in Community Laboratory. Thank you for giving me this kind of opportunity. Now I'm going to start my presentation. First of all, sarcopenia is defined as a syndrome characterized by progressive and generalized loss of muscle mass and strength, which is associated with decline of LDL, frailty, and death. Next, association between frailty involving the concept of sarcopenia and low blood pressure has been reported. According to the guideline of hypertension treatment, we should make individual decisions for frailty older patients based on their condition. So we need to accumulate knowledge on the association between frailty, sarcopenia, and long-term blood pressure levels. We hypothesize that BP levels would gradually decline in older patients with sarcopenia, approaching the point of needing nursing care. But unfortunately, few studies have examined association between muscle mass and BP levels among older patients stratified with antihypertensive drug use and dosages. So the aim of my study is to identify the association between loss of muscle mass and BP levels in community during older adults for 5 years, stratified with antihypertensive drug use and dosages. This study examined 118 patients. We excluded patients who need nursing care, have dementia, and missing data. Research design was longitudinal study. The determinant variable was the skeletal muscle mass index, SMI. In this study, we assessed sarcopenia with SMI. SMI means the limb muscle mass divided by the square of height. The outcome was systolic blood pressure levels. SPP means the annual average of systolic blood pressure in 2015 and 2020. Let me explain about data collection method. We collected data about SPP in 2015 and 2020 from medical record. However, SMI was measured only in 2020. Furthermore, we grouped the patient by antihypertensive drug use and dosage changes over 5 years. We categorized into non-antihypertensive drug, increased dosage, decreased dosage, and no change of drug. The statistic analysis is shown on this slide. Move on to the results curve. Main characteristics on this slide. The patient was 118. The average age was 81.1 years old. Patients in low SMI group were 40. Patients in normal SMI group were 78. Table 1 shows the characteristics compared with the normal SMI and low SMI groups. Low SMI group had a significantly lower BMI. This slide is the main result of this study. Let me show you about average SPP comparison between 2015 and 2020. We show normal SMI group on the left side and low SMI group on the right side in each graph. The blue bar means SPP in 2015 and yellow bar means SPP 2020. SPP levels decreased significantly only in low SMI group for 5 years. And SPP in 2020 was significantly lower in low SMI group than the normal SMI group. In the same way, SPP in 2000 with no antihypertensive drug patients, SPP in 2020 was significantly lower in low SMI group. With antihypertensive drug users in increased dosage patients SPP decreased for 5 years in low SMI group. Conversely, SPP increased in low normal SMI group. Differences in muscle mass may affect the antihypertensive drug effect. On the other hand, in decreased dosage and no change of patient, there was no difference in the trend of change SPP according to muscle mass. The small number of patients may affect the results. This is discussion part. Average SPP has significantly decreased over 5 years in low SMI group. Long-term changes of SPP might be the useful biomarker for low muscle mass. Among patients with increased dosage of antihypertensive drug, average SPP for 5 years decreased only in low SMI group. Drug blood concentration tends to be lower in older patients with cytopenia, where the decreased physiological reserve. So SMI may affect antihypertensive drug effect. Careful judgment is needed if doctors intend to increase drug dosages. As for the mechanism of association between muscle mass and BP levels, we believe that the reason for the decreased SPP is that loss of muscle mass reduces the muscle pumping action of the curve and decrease the circulating blood volume. And generally, exercise and nutrition affect muscle mass. Furthermore, cognitive function and social participation can also lead to reduced muscle mass. This is because less opportunity to go outside and reduced frequency of activity due to cognitive decline can be expected to reduce muscle mass. In the future, further studies are needed to consider involvement and measures not to lose their muscle mass. The limitations of this study are shown on the slide. This is conclusions. There may be association between low skeletal muscle mass and SPP decline in community during older adults for 5 years. Long-term changes of SPP might be the useful biomarker for low muscle mass. Further studies are needed to examine causal relationships, cognitive and social aspects. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yuka, for this very groundbreaking information about a topic we all want to know more about. I want to invite questions from anyone here in the room, as well as at Berkeley or other people who are attending from other locations. Please, if you wish, you can put your hand up if you're somewhere else, or put a question in the chat. So I wanted to mention that you have a very important area of study for looking at programs for home elder care. Everybody is wondering about the relationship between exercise and skeletal mass and health. And my question for you is, having done this one study, what do you want to look at next? You don't have to worry about funding because there's all the funding in the world for you. But what is your dream research project?
Thank you very much for your question. Ask me about my future research. Very nice. Let's see. In this study, the data about SMI was collected only 1 point. So In the future, I would like to research the longitudinal. Now, the people with enough muscle, and after that, if they lose muscle or have enough muscle, the director research the difference of blood pressure level. Yes.
Thank you. I think a more longitudinal study would be very important here. So we're looking forward to your future research on this area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
For our next presenter, we have Yuka Tachibana, also a doctoral student at Osaka University. And her topic is evaluation between respiratory function with spirometry and cognitive function in the community dwelling older population. Yuka, thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for giving me this great opportunity. I'm Yuka Tachibana, my second year of my PhD. Today, I'm going to explain about my research on the evaluation between respiratory function with spirometry and cognitive function in the home dwelling local elderly population. This next slide shows some background information. The number of dementia patients in the world is expected to triple to 131 million by 2015. Therefore, research measures to prevent dementia are serious challenge. The study of COPD has shown it is leading risk factor for dementia. Furthermore, COPD is expected to become the third leading cause of death worldwide 2013. Given this background, Japan government set the goal of 80% COPD awareness by 2022 as the target of the second phase of Healthy Japan in 2011. However, COPD awareness dropped to 28% in 2021 after reaching the highest record of 30.5% in 2013. Taken together, systematic measures are currently inadequate for COPD, a cause of dementia and a high mortality factor. Even these previous studies have recently reported that respiratory dysfunction and COPD are associated with cognitive decline. However, they are clear because of the following 3 points. Firstly, few studies involve those over 80 years old. Secondly, few studies published dementia with each respiratory function index in Japan. Lastly, results of previous studies about the impact of respiratory function and cognitive function were not consistent. I set myself the objective examination of the relationship between respiratory function assessed by spirometry and cognitive function in community dwelling older people. This shows methodologies. Please check your handout about the details later. The survey sample size included 380 people in their 70s and 321 people in their 80s, excluding those with missing data here. This is a method of the data analysis. My primary outcome analysis is cognitive function using Morgagé. I will now discuss the result of a study comparing 8 groups by cognitive function, respiratory function, smoking habits, and medical history. For the participants in their 18s, the study results suggested these worsening indexes. Interestingly, found that there are fewer current smokers and stroke patients in the 70s compared to the 80s. Next, this shows the result of the comparative validation between COPD stage and cognitive function. In the 80s group, the result had suggested that worsening COPD grade was associated with cognitive decline. Next, I'll discuss the result of my multiple regression analysis. I set the dependent variables as cognitive function, and these independent variables. The result indicated that cognitive function declined with roughly percent peak flow in all age groups. In addition, we found an independent association between diabetes and the history of alcohol consumption as well. Here discussion. First of all, I talk about prevalence of ventilation disorders. As shown, the prevalence of COPD and that of restricting ventilation were lower than those of previous large-scale epidemiological studies conducted in 12 countries and Japan. Next, COPD stage and cognitive function. This result suggests that cognitive function declined as COPD stage worsened in the 18th. Previous studies have reported that severe disease is associated even in young and middle-aged people. Next, I'll discuss about respiratory function test index and cognitive function. The results suggested that cognitive function declines with decreasing percent peak flow in all age groups. This mechanism is probably constant that chronic hypoxemia due to impaired ventilation has an adverse effect on cranial nerves. In addition, percent peak flow is related to muscle strength related to breathing in the upper body. Percent peak flow is the maximum value of expiratory air velocity used as a guideline for the diagnosis of bronchial asthma decreased in obstructive ventilation failure. Therefore, a decrease in percent peak flow is ventilatory impairment would be associated with cognitive decline. Regarding this study, we have three possible limitations. Firstly, survival bias. Secondly, recall bias. Lastly, measurement bias. Details are shown here. That the cross-sectional study, therefore, causality cannot be determined. This brings me to the end of this presentation. These results suggested that cognitive function declines in the local elderly population with COPD and also both worsening COPD stage and aging further worsen cognitive function. The percent peak flow indicating ventilation could be associated with cognitive decline, and this is an interesting result. Preventing respiratory function decline is important for maintaining cognitive function. Based on our conclusion, we need to take the following three parts of health coaching for the elderly in our community. Firstly, on smoking cessation, which is a major cause of ventilation problems. Secondly, prevention and vaccination of respiratory infections such as COVID-19. Lastly, early detection and provision of appropriate treatment before ventilatory disorders become severe. And finally, besides the participation of the sonic study, part of the research chair, so to be giving this wonderful opportunity and support. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions in the audience or online. And again, you can put them on the chat. Any questions? One question that we were wondering about is, so you have a conclusion about these 3 things that can be done to improve the healthy aging based on this study. So do you know, or maybe somebody else, because you committed, are these points being introduced in the healthy aging activities that you're doing for living in the community?
And I wanted to add a question to this for Professor Komide or you or anybody else here. So Professor Komide presented a very important framework for healthy aging, starting in the younger years. Just like you said, that even at younger years, if you have respiratory problems, then that will increase your aging and cognitive decline. So I'm very curious about how all of this and some of the other studies relate to the framework. And you may want to explain the framework to, say, people on Zoom who have not seen it yet.
Thank you so much for a good question. First of all, for the first question, the health nurse of local give health coaching about the smoking cessation and preventing infections through the result of health examination. So all Japanese must take the annual examination based on Japanese regulation. However, of course, some local people and some workers don't take the health examination. So we need to take another approach on not only the health examination, but also health coaching for local people and company.
Yes, thank you very much for wonderful suggestions. So, smoking cessation is one of very important strategy to prolong the healthy life expectancy in Japan. So, the COPD is now getting higher rate in Japan. So, smoking cessation is one of very important governmental strategy to prevent COPD and prolong the healthy life expectancy. So, our framework of healthy life, healthy aging project. So, Professor, we have a question. So, how old is from health promotion to be effective for to promote healthy life expectancy? I think younger is better, but I think at older age, I think 70 years, from 70 years would be the minimum, I think after 70 years, they are having aging strategies very rapidly. So before 70 years would be better, but everybody cannot recognize that their physical decline or cognitive decline before 70 years. So maybe we have to promote more younger age would be important. to prevent dementia or maybe for 30 years, 40 years. So the lifestyle related disease control will be connected to the future of COVID decline. So, but everybody cannot recognize so far. So we have to promote the more younger age. It's really important to prevent future geriatric syndrome, including dementia and frailty, those kind of physical and cognitive decline by aging. So this is my idea. Theory.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think what we're talking about is healthy aging is really a life course approach. And it starts maybe even before we're born. So that's very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And moving along, our next presenter is Angela Nguyen, and she was a Doctor of Public Health student at Berkeley University, at UC Berkeley, and she is now a postdoctoral student. And her topic is community preparedness, resilience, and recovery to natural disasters. Angela, are you there and able to share your presentation? There
Hi,
you are.
Marlon.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 sec. Okay. I just want to confirm that you all can see my screen, yeah? So yeah, my name is Angela Nguyen, and I'm a recent graduate from the Doctor of Public Health program at UC Berkeley. I want to first thank Dr. Mouse and Dr. Sang for inviting me to be part of this symposium. One of my main research areas is in disaster mental health epidemiology. And so today I'm presenting one part of my dissertation work, which is titled Predictors of Mental Health Trajectories Among Adult Survivors 10 Years After Hurricane Katrina, 2005 to 2015. So definitely a different topic than from the other topics we've heard, but mirrored around the aspect of recovery and wellness. And this is the outline of my presentation. I kind of wanted to talk more about my positioning and why I'm doing this, talking about disasters, and then the one of focus today, which is Hurricane Katrina, public health significance of this work, and just a really quick overview of the methods, the main results, and the conclusions and implications of my work. So I really wanted to start with this image of a researcher who I look up to a lot, Dr. Rachel Yehuda, and I met her during my work before I came to Berkeley. So I used to work with 9/11 survivors, and my community work with 9/11 survivors and talking about their experiences after having been through something so traumatic was, wanting to understand not so much about, because the whole world has been really heavily steeped in PTSD and depression and the adverse mental health comes, but I was really drawn to the stories of stories behind thriving, adaptation, and who we know and the things around us are part of that process. And there's a really great quote I wanted to share from her that really kind of sums up my positioning as a researcher in this field. We have to appreciate that there's a lot of variability and diversity in the way that we respond to trauma. So some have argued that the diagnosis of PTSD is too limiting. Some have argued that it's too expansive. But one thing is for certain, PTSD is only one kind of outcome to trauma, only one type of response. And there are many others, including resilience. So in my research, I primarily have focused on human-made disasters in 9/11. And more recently, I have focused on natural disasters. And so we know that there are several types of disasters: human-made, intentional, human-made, non-intentional, and we know that natural disasters make up one part of that. And so we're probably most familiar with natural disasters as they are happening all the time. And so some include, wildfires, tsunamis, landslides, and extreme heat or heat waves. Of course, hurricanes is one category of that, and the one that we're all familiar with is Hurricane Katrina. And just to, as a reminder, Hurricane Katrina was a tropical cyclone that made landfall in the US Gulf Coast in August of 2005. It led to thousands of fatalities, severe displacement, and destroyed homes. It was the costliest disaster in the United States. And most importantly, the storm directly impacted low-income and Black communities living in vulnerable environments. And we also remember, this is an image from the New York Times, it was the largest internal displacement in the country. People didn't have control over where they went after the storm, and there's still so much to learn about the survivors of Katrina, and they are the focus of my research. So I have two research questions from the study. The first is, how do the longitudinal trajectories of post-traumatic mental health differ among survivors of Katrina 10 years after the fact? And what are the baseline predictors associated with the trajectories among survivors of Katrina? And so why does this matter? Well, disasters affect millions of people every year, and the frequency and human impacts are increasing. Exposure to disaster, as we know, is associated with a range of mental health outcomes. And people have studied PTSD, depression, physical mental health comorbidities. But there are also other long-term mental health impacts. And some people have proposed that there are different pathways, pathways to recovery, pathways to resilience, but also chronic low well-being. So I'm hoping to understand what contributes to these different pathways. And, resilience and recovery, why do we care about that? Well, they're also important for pre and post-disaster intervention efforts. And so guiding theories for my work, because always has to be a guiding theory, and there are two main ones. The first is a conservation and resource theory, which is really central to the broader stress theory, that people work really, really hard to obtain, protect, and things that they value. So stress happens when those quote unquote resources are threatened or gone. And then, psychological distress happens when people are unable to maintain or replace those resources. And then, of course, life course theory of the aspect of time is important for my work, and that impacts of disasters can really vary depending on where people are in their life. And so for this main analysis, I used a longitudinal cohort called the Gulf Coast Child and Family Health Study. 5 waves of data were collected. The baseline survey was collected 6 months after Hurricane Katrina, and then 2007, 2008, and 2009, and then 2015. So 10 years of data collectively. In terms of the conclusion criteria, I selected people who were 18 years or older at baseline and that had complete baseline mental health data. So my total N was 1,075. And this data set of people is supposed to represent families who were heavily impacted by Hurricane Katrina on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and Louisiana. So methods. In terms of the first question and looking at the trajectories, the indicator for that was self-rated mental health. And the measure I used for that was mental component summary, which is a 12-item checklist that has various domains of mental health shown here. It's a score of 0 to 100, higher scores indicating better mental health. And then for the part 2 analysis, after identifying the trajectories, what predictors of interest was I interested in? I looked at demographic and household and health factors such as age, religiosity, gender, race, marital status, if there were children in the household income, physical health, employment status, and general health status. I also looked at disaster-related factors, including having received financial resources, mental health care needs, and number of times that someone had moved. In terms of the statistical approaches, to classify the underlying trajectories, I used a method called latent growth mixture modeling. I won't go too much into that, but it is a method to classify individuals into subgroups based on their mental health scores over time. So what are the clusters of people that we can observe, the underlying subpopulations? And then for the second part of the analysis, after figuring out what the trajectories are, looking at the predictors of each one, I use a multinomial logistic regression. So looking at which predictors were significantly associated with each trajectory membership using baseline data. So, and we calculated adjusted odds ratios for each of the predictors. So the main analysis, what we found that there were 3 types of groups. This is after doing a bunch of different models and looking at different fit indices. And so we see, based on our conceptualization of different types of outcomes and based on the shape and the slope, there were 3 main ones. And as I mentioned, higher scores of MCS means better mental health. And so we see that the blue one up above is resilience. And so there's a low initial starting point and they kind of really achieve a stable level of mental health over time. And that's what I had identified as resilience. Recovery in green is that they started at a lower point and they got better at a higher slope over time. And then you have to see a third group that kind of is low at the beginning and kind of stays low over time. That is the chronic low well-being group. And so after having these 3 groups, we can move on to figure out, well, what are the predictors that put people in these different groups and setting the chronic group as the reference group. And just know, I had a lot of findings. I want to highlight some of the main ones. The first was that to be in the recovery and resilience group, typically people were white and had higher pre-disaster household incomes. Older people compared to younger people were more likely to be in the resilience group compared to the chronic group. Those who were unemployed after Katrina, who became unemployed, were less likely to be in the resilient group. Those who moved several times had lower odds of being in the recovery group. And those who did not have their mental health needs met following Katrina had a greater odds of being in the resilience group versus the chronic group. So let's just say with. So conclusions and implications. What are the main things and why does this matter? Well, we were able to identify 3 distinct classes of mental health wellness, and those 3 groups were resilience, recovery, and chronic low mental health. Why does this matter? Well, it'll inform approaches for other disasters and how we measure resilience and other types of recovery in the context of other disasters. We found that age, employment, residential mobility, financial resources, and mental health services were some of the most important predictors of different types of pathways in mental health. So this indicates that we should increase and invest in programs and policies around housing assistance, economic resources, and mental health care for people who survive disasters, both immediately and in the long term. I just want to quickly acknowledge my dissertation committee at UC Berkeley, Emily Ozer, Ray Catalano, and Sophia Raab-Hesketh, and other folks at UC Berkeley, NYU, who are part of this project. Thanks so much. And this is my email address if you have any questions.
Angela, thank you so much for your presentation. And are there any questions for Angela in the auditorium?
I have a comment.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Angela, for your fascinating presentation. I never heard before, since we are in Japan and we have natural disaster like we had this big earthquake 10 years ago in we call it Tohoku Daishinsai, and Tohoku in Tohoku in North Japan, and a lot of people from Tohoku and from Fukushima moved to Okayama, where I used to live, as a new place for them. And I hear a lot about after this kind of disaster, people talk about financial recovery, economic recovery, but I never heard before in Japan about something about the mental or mental recovery after the disaster. So I really hope that we carry on here in Japan an excellent research like Angela research. And thank you, Angela.
Oh, thanks for the comment. There are actually some papers that have looked at I don't focus on this, but this is really relevant to this symposium, is that elderly populations who've experienced earthquakes, I don't remember which ones in Japan, they seem to have done well over time compared to younger people who survived. And that's largely a part of having that social network, having social capital that they were able to keep. And we know that social capital is a huge part of our mental health and well-being over time. And so it seems that there is something going on culturally and society-wise where possibly older folks are able to have maybe access to sources of social support afterwards that enable them to do so.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's a great observation, and thank you for your question. There's clearly an overlap on what Angela's talking about, those elements, resilience and chronicity, et cetera, that apply very much to things like, for example, Naoko Murakami's studies, et cetera. What are those things that create resilience that allow you to go back home, et cetera? So there's clearly an overlap on these two areas. So that's great. Angela, thank you for joining us. Good luck.
Thanks. Good to see you, Marlon.
Very good. And we have reached the end of session 1. Are we having a short break or go directly to it? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to all the wonderful students for pioneering research that's going to be very helpful to all of us in the future.
Thank you. We're gonna get started on session 2 with special lectures by invited professors from UC Berkeley. And I want to introduce and welcome Professor Kei Kamide and Professor Mai Kabayama to come and moderate this session 2. Professor Kamide and Professor Kabayama.
Hey, very interesting session 1. Thank you very much for presenters, the students. So now we are moving to the session 2. We are very happy to have this special lecture by invited 3 professors from UC Berkeley, Professor Winston Sen, Professor Marlon Mars, Professor Linda Neuhauser. So first presenter is Professor Winston Sen. Now he's professor of research of community health sciences, School of Public Health, UC Berkeley. Also, he is now specially appointed professor in Osaka University, Division of Health Science, Berkeley School of Medicine. So, Professor Winston Sen is for this 3 years program. He is always that's specially appointed the faculties for these 3 years. He had many research guidance for our laboratory. So many students, he takes care of our many students. And finally, now it's 2 published, 2 English papers published from this collaborative program, mentored by the Professor Winston Sen. Okay, we are very excited about your lecture today. So this title is the Pacific Islanders Together Towards Health During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Professor Winston Sen, please.
Thank you, Professor Kamide, Professor Kabayama. Very honored and pleasure to be here today for the International Symposium. My work with the Pacific Islanders for this community assessment started because my colleagues, Tao and also Natalie, who's also co-authors for the presentation, They talk to me about, at their church, they always something about funerals. So as church members, there seems to be a lot of funerals going around for Pacific Islands, even pre-COVID. And during COVID, it just seems something is getting worse. So we needed to do some assessment to see what is happening. So that was how we started to do this community assessment, to understand also about COVID, including testing, vaccination, and concerns, and utilization of services, perhaps through faith-based services or other county services, and also perhaps the church members' interest in health ministry programs, as well as thinking about mental health status, and cultural health of Pacific Islander communities. We collaborated with a number of churches in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we provide some recommendations. So I want to acknowledge Together for Its Health, which is a program of the Public Health Institute for funding this project. And we also want to acknowledge all the 13 churches who participated in this study and grateful for their partnership and the hardships they encountered during COVID-19. And I'm also part of the Regional Pacific Islander Task Force in the San Francisco Bay Area, truly established in 2015 to really understand a variety of issues from home to maternal child health, behavioral health, and chronic conditions, and also data. There was a lot of gaps. It was established in 2015 because over 30 years, nothing from government was reaching Pacific Islanders, Samoans, Tongans, Fijians in the San Francisco Bay Area. And these champions of the Pacific Island community said, this has to stop. So that's how the Regional Pacific Islander Task Force started. There were some of the highest infant mortality rates, some of the highest rates for a number of chronic conditions, and nothing was being done. So this was also a part of the research to address that issue with the task force. In the San Francisco Bay Area, it represents about 1/3 of all Pacific Islanders in California, almost 100,000. And these are some of the counties in our San Francisco Bay Area, with some of the largest counties, such as Alameda County, Santa Clara County, Sonoma County. And small populations are often left out. And this study was to ensure that small populations are not left out of health and social services. During COVID-19, we found the studies found from the California Department of Public Health showed that the mortality rates increased the highest compared to all other racial groups, or Pacific Islanders compared to all the other groups in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that data actually is also true for California. So that was some of the rationale. And looking at some of our local counties, also monitoring, the Regional Pacific Islander Task Force has been monitoring on behalf of the local governments, counties, to monitor the COVID rates. And it's showing the orange lines show the case rates for Pacific Islanders in the various counties from the beginning of 2020 when things got started till probably the end of 2022. And the blue line is the county average. So with every county, the rates are higher persistently for Pacific Islanders, the case rates. And actually the death rate as well, it's not shown here. And the one in Contra Costa County was that they didn't even collect any Pacific Islander data, or they collected as other. And that was the case for most Bay Area counties, that they didn't collect any Pacific Islander data when the Pacific Islander Task Force started. So we were supporting their efforts. And the rates are also like in San Francisco and other counties in the Bay Area. Pacific Islander case rates are are substantially increasing and higher compared to the average for the counties. For this study, we did a survey with 13 churches, and some of the key measures looking at health status, COVID characteristics, mental health, and use of church-based services. We used online website and also at the church after services. And we did, for this study that I'm presenting, is some descriptive statistics and some one-way ANOVA test. We're also working on multinomial logistic regression, but the data is not recorded for this presentation. So for participants, they are all a range of groups from young adults to older adults. In the United States, actually, we consider 50 and older. We define that as older adults. It's a little different from Japan. And also by gender, by sex, there's higher percentage of females. And by ethnicity, Tongans, Samoans, Fijians, and also multi-ethnic Pacific Islanders. Some of the rates that we found, tested for COVID in the past 14 days, about 1 in 4. And for those who got tested, about 1 in 4 tested positive. And for those who tested at least vaccinated, almost 85% got vaccinated. Among those who got vaccinated, most of them were fully vaccinated, 97%. And if they would choose to get vaccinated, definitely, probably about 3 out of 4. Yeah, there's still some hesitation. And then in terms of concern about vaccine safety, there are some concerns. More than half, are moderately to very extremely concerned, and also concerned about side effects. They are also over 50% are moderately to very extremely concerned. And that's because, many of their family members, extended family, church members, probably got COVID. They had the highest case rates and the death rates of all racial groups in California. So it was definitely a concern. And finding information on COVID, it seemed, many of them was able to, very much, and somewhat able to do that. And also most of them, 2 out of 3, trust the information from the government or the local counties. And certainly with the church, because the church and the Regional Pacific Island Task Force collaborations has been ongoing from 2015 to this period, about 2020, 2021. So that church and community collaboration made a difference. And understanding information about what to do is positive. Over 80%, understood very well or somewhat easy, and understands what to do about shelter in place or social distance. Also a majority, 77%. And we asked them, if they wanted to use churches for testing, COVID testing. 45% said yes. Churches for vaccination, 47% said yes. And used for food distribution, 67%. So yeah, very much appreciate and trust the churches for sure. In our area, often there are many free testing vaccination sites through the government. So that's often another source that's very common. And in the future, if they want to, they think they should have health and social services through the church. And most of them agree, yes, that's a good idea. And also to have, many of them did not have a health program in the churches, and they thought it would be helpful to start a health ministry program. 86% agreed. And health status. about 18% thought they were fair and poor during this period, during the COVID area. And psychological distress, about 47% thought it was moderate or severe, which is a very big percentage, which is a big concern. And about 40% utilized a mental health provider in the past year. And then culturally, there's a risk factors. They felt alienated, about 6%, and about 7% felt marginalized. And then cultural protective factors. They felt, many of them within the community, they got support. So feel balanced in mind, body, spirit, and soul, and really connect to their culture. About half of them. I think a challenge is also because they live far apart from each other, small populations. They're not concentrated in one place in the Bay Area. So sometimes they aren't able to reach the churches or the places. And then looking at psychological distress, we found some significance with the ANOVA testing for age, where at least a group of 31 to 50 had more moderate or severe psychological distress. And also ethnicity, particularly Tongans and Samoans had higher rates of psychological distress, moderate to severe. And also looking at health status, we could see those who have fair or poor health status had higher rates of moderate to severe psychological distress. And a number of them who have moderate or severe psychological distress more likely used a mental health provider in the past year. And also trust in church. I think interesting here, those who have little or no psychological distress have very much trust more. Along the same veins, though, cultural protective factors, those with moderate or severe had more cultural protective factors. So there may be other places other than the church, the community, the extended family. I know the Pacific Islander families, the kinship network and clan network is very strong. At the same time, we could see those who had moderate or severe psychological distress, those with more cultural risk factors like isolation and also higher psychological distress. And I think just to mention some of the work, sometimes working with the counties and the local governments, they don't really look at some of the statistical results. What they care about is more of the descriptive statistic. And if there's some data they can use, though, it's helpful because if we don't have this data on Pacific Islander gaps, they won't provide any funding or programs. So this result is actually making a difference to make change and trying to help the local counties to understand the issues. And as an example, one recommendation is really maybe there's a need to work with the churches across the board, across all the counties, to work together, Santa Clara, San Mateo, Alameda County, the San Francisco area counties. And really it's so important for government to work closely with the churches and the community organizations to reach the Pacific Islanders. And really building up that community health infrastructure and workforce through the Pacific Islander communities. I think that's been a major gap. And some of the work is now the local county governments have tried to work with the Pacific Islander communities to actually recruit workers to public health departments and also to actually work with community to actually collect community assessment data. I know one experience with San Mateo County was they do their regular community assessment survey, and they were only able to recruit less than 5 Pacific Islanders in the San Mateo County when they have 17,000 Pacific Islanders. In our study, we collected more than 400 samples in a month, and San Mateo was never able to collect any data for their community assessment for Pacific Islanders. So now they have us, our task force, so we can work with them. And so we continue to support COVID resources, stop the deaths from coming to this community, continue to support initiatives of the church and the community agencies. We also had organized a community event, a faith-based coalition initiative between all the 10 county area public health agencies as well as the churches to support this work. So this research is actually making a difference with the governments. And mental health was identified as a gap, so we really need to support more mental health programs for Pacific Islander communities and really prioritize those issues. And certainly data. For such a long time, there was no data for Pacific Islanders in the San Francisco Bay Area. Even when we started working with San Francisco County, they didn't even report data for Pacific Islanders. Unfortunately, the only county at the time was Alameda County out of the 10 area counties reporting Pacific Islander health issues. So certainly a lot of accomplishments by this group of the Regional Pacific Islander Task Force over the past couple of years. With food distribution was really a big deal, and certainly the testing and vaccinations. And certainly elders are so important, protecting our elders for the Pacific Islander community. And as my colleague Tal would say, as Pacific Islanders, they feel Pacific Islanders can create their own destiny for Pacific Islander health and can take care of themselves, but needs to be recognized and supported. And this photo is of the 6 sailing canoes of the Pacific Voyagers expedition from New Zealand to California around 2011. And Tal, my friend, was able to witness the arrival at that time. And really there's a need for calls for action to continue to invest and partner with Pacific Islander communities, establish at least there's at minimum data, but also all the various issues of the Pacific Islander health community, because it's so invisible, and don't leave the small communities out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Winston, and thank you for your very wonderful and very interesting presentation. And I'm very much surprised to see that impact of the COVID is so strong to these Pacific Islanders. And it seems that it's very, very different, the impact. And before the audience, I have one question. Why is that? What is the most big reason for their vulnerability for the health crisis?
During the COVID, I think, it's very hard, they go to church and they often gather as a family, a larger family, multiple uncles, aunts, and family all get together. So that's how they connect. They have a very strong community connection. So when COVID hit, they still wanted to come together. That's a challenge, I think. But also, some of the Pacific Islanders in the United States, they have the highest rates of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, compared to all the other racial groups, actually. So, but they're so small population, they're just not paid attention to, unlike the African Americans. or Latinos. So they're just left out. So because they're so small that they don't report the data. So then the counties or the states or the governments don't pay attention to them. And we're gathering the data, working with the government to report the data. Now they can see actually the results are very severe. So these are some of the challenges, gathering, and they learn not to do that. And that, but still it's very hard. But also because of their pre-existing chronic conditions, it also made it even harder.
I see. Thank you very much. And now we are welcoming with questions or comments from floors or online. Professor Mara, please.
I have a question about, and this is a follow-up to Professor Kabayama's question. Do you see a role of this group that is now making a difference in addressing some of the root causes? Because you have mentioned talking regarding nutrition, etc., but regarding the root causes, such as at least in the Latino population, one of the reasons that there was such inequity is because they are the frontline workers, and that is, I understand, similar in this group. So, are you also going to be involved as a group in maybe having labor laws? Are you going to go into governmental labor laws, try to apply prevention? Is that also going to be part of the mission, or do you see a place for it?
I think making change through advocacy and policy is certainly a priority. But at the same time, it's really challenging because most states or counties across the United States, they don't report Pacific Islander data and they don't publish it. So we're just trying to at least get it on the radar. So that's something we're still working on, and for the states or even in California. So it's not even on the radar. And the issues also in the Pacific Islands, in the US territories, are even worse. Data is not being collected adequately for COVID, but also pre-COVID, there's poor data for Pacific Islanders collected. Other than Hawaii is doing very good information, but it's just so many people are just being left out right now because there's no data recording the high rate of mortalities in Arkansas with this data. So that's probably the number one priority right now, is raise from invisibility to visibility for a government or for other funders to support this effort. And then certainly when we can, we're going to do the workforce, try to have more people who are culturally and linguistically competent, perhaps from the Pacific Island communities, to be trained and to become workers to support various health efforts.
Thank you very much. Any other question? Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. From your presentation, I found that it is really important to focus on the people who are left out and make evidence and show them that so the problem is visible, so that can work progress which we can do together in the field. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next presenters, I'm very honored to introduce two great professors from UC Berkeley. Professor Linda Neuhauser. So I'd like to introduce Professor Linda Neuhauser first. She's a clinical professor of community health science at School of Public Health, UC University of California, Berkeley. And also she's a visiting professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Science at Nanjing Youdian University in China. She's also co-principal investigator of the Health Research for Action Center at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. So she's always giving us the very fascinating ideas to do the research for these 3 years symposiums. And the Professor Marlon Mouse like to introduce. He's an adjunct professor at University of California, Berkeley School of Public Health. He was a former director, Dr. PhD program at the University of UC Berkeley. So his background is a medical doctor of ophthalmology. So he trained, he is graduate medical school at Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, and he trained ophthalmology in the medical center of the Delaware. No, I'm sorry, ophthalmology in Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia, and he moved to UC Berkeley School of Public Health. So we so their title, presentation title is Design Thinking and Innovative Solution to Complex Health Problems. This is an introduction to tomorrow's workshop, I think. Please start your lecture.
The first thing is we would like to apologize for any mistake in our translations. We use Google Translate, so hopefully there won't be too many. And today's agenda is we're going to do a quick introduction. We're going to talk about complex problems, which are also known as wicked problems. Then we're going to talk a little bit about design thinking. We'll have time for some questions and comments. And then, as Professor Mina mentioned, we're going to describe what the workshop for tomorrow will be. And we have been introduced already. And this is previous visit to Japan. The first question is, why today's lecture? And the reason, so one of the reasons is that public health practice is actually about finding solutions. And to do that, we need to provide an approach on how to solve problems. Complex problems, which, as I mentioned, are also called wicked problems, need special ways of addressing them. And especially, we need to look at this through a public health lens.
And we hope that you will go away from this talk, and especially from the workshop tomorrow, with the idea that we all need to change the way we do research and the way we do interventions. So we'll start out here looking at criteria for what makes a complex problem. And I have to thank the engineers, because they're the people who originally came up with this list back in the 1970s. And we'll get into the history of how all this started a little bit later. But here's some of the criteria that you can use to judge whether you're working on a complex problem. And the first one is that the problem is difficult or impossible to solve, because you have incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are often difficult to know about. The second is that the definition is going to depend on who's looking at the problem. If a researcher is looking at it, it might be different than, say, a government person or someone else. Complex problems don't have any single solution, so you can't really solve them. Efforts to solve a complex problem might show or create other problems. Next, those who are charged with solving a problem, that could be, for example, the government, also cause problems. And finally, a complex problem can be a symptom of another problem.
And we have several examples of what these wicked or complex problems. They are really hard, big problems such as health, economic, environmental. And most of the time, these problems require solutions in which there's going to be a great number of people are going to be involved. And they need to change their mindset. And most importantly, probably one of the hardest things is we are going to have to cause changes in behavior. Change in behavior is very, very difficult, as we know in public health. Other examples include, and all of them have an importance on public health, global climate change, natural hazards, we heard about some today, healthcare, AIDS, COVID pandemic, influenza, trafficking. As you can see, the list is huge. And one very important big problem that is the focus of this symposium is aging. And this is hopefully a little bit what we just talked about.
Tell us if this makes sense. Is there anything here that you would like us to explain a little bit more that's not clear?
This list that we are showing in Japanese, hopefully, and in English, is we're going to be showing a short video, a very quick 3-minute video, which is going to show how do you approach a complex problem, a wicked problem. First of all, they're going to present some examples of the complex problem. Why are they complex? Why cannot they be solved? And very important, this is a journey from when you realize there is a problem through finding and developing a solution. They will look at the problem, they will come up with many ideas, because the more ideas you have without restricting them, the greater the possibility of finding a solution. And then you will find which one of them seems to work best, and you will continue refining it. This is a visual path. This is the right brain that we're trying to approach. And finally, they're going to find out that a small group of committed people can change the world. So let's look at this video, and hopefully this is the description of the video that we presented. Yep. For the volume, is there any way to, or should I just use?
Our society is faced with some serious problems that we don't seem to get rid of. Problems like fundamentalism, global warming, economic crisis, or aging societies. So-called wicked problems. Problems are wicked because we ourselves, our beliefs and values and our habits are part of it. They cannot be solved in the traditional way. We need new approaches, novel ideas, fresh minds. Gelderland and EVOS joined forces to conduct an experiment. To explore how we can deal with such wicked problems. How can we put some new ideas on social innovation to the test? Could we find new guiding principles and methods for social innovation? How to solve a wicked problem is a wicked problem in itself. So we have no fixed recipe, no roadmap leading to our destination. We need to venture into the unknown territories of design thinking, social innovation. So first of all, we need a crew. We invited 40 diverse individuals to join us. Architects, hackers, researchers, aid workers, and many more. A diverse group to bring many different perspectives, experiences, and skills to the table. We prepared workshop sessions, provided an inspiring setting and guides to introduce them to the world of wicked problems. We are ready to go. First destination, Greece. The economic crisis. The team learns firsthand how the crisis affects society and how people are trying to deal with it, their pains and dilemmas. 5 teams roll up their sleeves and start working. Some try to analyze and investigate, others produce concrete ideas for action, or search for a connection to their personal experiences. It turns out to be an energetic and messy process. that produces many ideas, but also confusion. Though we just started, the going is starting to get tough. Some of us feel we're getting nowhere. Some of us leave our expedition. But when we look closer, we see that we learned a lot. Wicked problems cannot be solved by one person. You need a horizontal network, distributed knowledge. It's not about getting it right, but finding new stories, new coping strategies. The second thing we learned is that we should look for patterns and values that wire wicked problems. When we understand those, we can start to fiddle with the wires and get unstuck. Thirdly, we need to be agile. Jump up and down between understanding the bigger picture and working on small-scale solutions. With these learnings now in our backpack, we went to the next stage of our journey. The second session, we explored what happens when tough issues become transparent. 4 teams each looked at different problems and tried to apply transparency as a strategy to problems in healthcare costs, fair election, innovation in education, and in local governance. Transparency turned out to bring its own fair share of wickedness. It might solve one problem, but what about privacy? We learned about the circular paradox of co-creation. For a project to start, you need clear goals and objectives. But solving a wicked problem means that understanding the problem evolves along with creating solutions. This is where the usual politics of accountability collide with the dynamics of co-creation. We discovered 3 ways to counteract these dynamics: transparency of intentions, transparency of process, and transparency of objectives. Now we are no rookies anymore. The difficulties and setbacks of the first 2 sessions made us more confident. We learned about facilitation, how to make a group of diverse people work together productively, about the pitfalls and hurdles that can slow us down. We tried to attack a wicked problem head on, then concentrated on strategies, and now we will look at what people actually do to cope with wicked problems. What innovative approaches already exist in the Netherlands and abroad to use the wisdom and potential of our elders? For instance, in African or Asian societies. From this session, we learned that change starts with a solid foundation, a mission and vision rooted in the needs and daily practices of elders. That initiatives cannot grow without new connections. Then one idea might spark another, and you get nowhere if you can't make ideas smart. You might think that wicked problems cannot be solved, or that you as an individual are just too insignificant in the light of the grand challenges and wicked problems. But we learned that we can find new principles and methods and start working towards solutions. Or in the words of Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
So we like this video because it kind of gives you an artistic view of what goes on. And now, and especially tomorrow in the workshop, we're going to be going through a lot of the processes that you saw in that video to try to work on some problems. Right now, we're going to do an exercise 2. So we have a question for all of you, and that is the COVID-19 pandemic a complex problem? We want you to think about that. And we want you to use the criteria that we showed earlier and pick out 3 criteria that would support your idea if you think the pandemic is a complex problem. We're going to put that list up. We'll give you 3 minutes. And during that time, pick out any 3 of those criteria for a complex problem that you think explains why the pandemic is a complex problem, if you do. And then we're going to ask you to report back with your reasons. So here's the list. We'll go back to that.
So please remember, choose 3 choices and you have 2 minutes. So we're putting up the criteria. These are the criteria. So choose 3 of these. Why you think that the COVID pandemic is a complex problem. And then we will ask the volunteers to report. Let's go on to report. And do we have any volunteers? And all you have to do is say which of these ones you think are important, why the COVID-19 pandemic is a complex problem. Anybody in the audience? Any volunteers? That gentleman on the...
I think it's very complex problem. It's very complex because it cannot be solved with only one solution. Some people say maybe the vaccine, but still there's people who refuse to take the vaccine. And the government's supposed to solve it, but sometimes the government makes some rule and law and regulations that cause the problem. So yeah, I think it's a very complex problem.
Thank you. That's exactly right. Anybody else? We have time for one other person. Thank you.
If I may, yeah, I agree that this is a complex problem because the virus is continuing to mutate. So it's not a static problem that we can attack through some sort of consistent approach. It also depends on stakeholder views. Some people think the virus is meaningless. They think that vaccines are ineffective or some sort of a plot to take over our minds or something like that. And other problems certainly may emerge as we try to solve this problem. Political issues may come up, so on. So indeed, a tangled web and difficult to resolve.
Thank you so much.
And I want to do a time check with our moderators. Just wondering how much longer we have.
Okay, maybe yes, maximum is 12.
Okay.
Maximum.
12 o'clock.
Oh no, we just we just wanted to know if we're kind of halfway through our presentation.
Yeah.
No, that's
yeah. 20 minutes more.
Oh, no problem. Plenty. So as we talked about unique strategies to tackle these very complex problems, and there are many strategies out there. For example, there can be some that are very authoritative, such as in China. One way they chose to try to fix the pandemic, and as we now know, it didn't work, was to completely close the country for 2 years. So that didn't work. But there's some that are competitive and some that are collaborative, getting different stakeholders to try to address the problem. What we are going to propose, and this is a way of addressing complex problems, particularly in public health, is a transdisciplinary collaborative approach. And one example, again, there's many, but one example is called design thinking. And now we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so the history of design thinking is very interesting, and often in medicine and public health, we don't talk enough about history, but we're building everything we do, including design thinking, on many hundreds of years of history. So if you look back a long time ago, you would notice that when programs were built or buildings were built, so forth, people did their own thing. The experts would build them, and they wouldn't necessarily bring in the perspectives of a lot of other people. So that happened for a long time. And then in the 1900s, we had the Industrial Revolution. And so there, things changed a lot. If you're going to go from a small number of people building things or let's say a small number of decision makers, to having a large industrial activity, then you really need to think more like engineers do. How do you break that down into different problems, different issues, and different systems? So we saw a lot of that happening. And in the 1940s, something that really advanced the idea of bringing more of the users into the design was Toyota. So there you had a very interesting activity in which those engineers thought through things about users. How would users use our product? How can we break down the issues that users have? And this advanced things all over the world. We then had, what do we got here?
Yeah, the drive was designing for people movement back in the 1950s, which is how can you make medical equipment or industrial equipment that is specifically designed for the use of people.
Mm-hmm. Then we had Research Park, which is located in Silicon Valley in California, where all the computers were originally, the big computer area there. And what they did was they started looking more at human-centered design and how you could apply that to a lot of technological products. And again, they advanced. They built on the background like Toyota. So they studied all of that and brought those kinds of things into what they did. And then in the 1990s, we had a fellow called Don Norman, University of California at San Diego. And he said something very interesting. He said, the way it should be is that people propose ideas, researchers study them, and technology conforms to fit what people want and what the research shows. So that is, kind of the foundation of what we're talking about here. Then we're going to be getting into design thinking, which is a particular method. Now that started with an engineer by the name of David Kelly. And he's the founder of Stanford University School of Design, or we call it now the D School. And he's quite famous for working with Steve Jobs, who's the founder of Apple. The two of them worked together to figure out this method called design thinking and to apply that to all the products that Apple made, the computers, the phones, all of that. And that is, in my view, why these products were so successful. So they figured out a way to get very deeply into engaging the users at every space during the development of these products. So the front end, as we call it, took a long time. Every little thing about the products they studied. So we are now going to go into what design thinking actually is.
And this is, as we mentioned, useful when you're addressing complex problems, and it is solution-focused strategies, which came up in the first session, which is why is this useful in public health as creating solutions? There are 5 steps to design thinking process. But the 5 steps, as you can see, go in a circle. So you're going to first start empathizing, and we're going to talk a little bit about what each one of them means. Then you're going to define the problem, ideate, create ideas, prototype, create a prototype of the product or the process or the program. Then you're going to test it, but you don't end there. After you've tested it, you go back to see, did it work? Why did it work, or why didn't it work? So first we'll talk about empathizing. Empathizing is a word in which you are going to be getting the feelings of what the other person, the user, is actually feeling. So you have to set your own assumptions aside. You can't decide, oh, this is a good thing or a bad thing. You have to go in without your own assumptions, and you immerse yourself in the context of the problem. And there are many ways in which you can do this. You can do face-to-face interviews to learn about how the people are currently solving the same or similar issues. And then you use a thing called empathy maps.
So this is a very helpful method. If you look at this map, it's divided up into 4 components. An empathy map is a way of finding out what the user thinks about something, a problem, a potential program, whatever it might be, what they say, what they feel, and what they actually do. And what we're learning from human-centered design and design thinking is that those 4 things can be very different. If we are researchers or developers or business marketers, we often don't know all 4 things. And because of that, we don't have enough information to move on. So here's an example of an empathy map, and this takes a very common type of thing. So this empathy map, which may be a little hard to read, but it looks at the experience of somebody buying a television. So I'm going to put a situation out here that's very common, and it could be considered a complex problem by a company that sells televisions. So let's say there's a store that's selling TVs, but they're finding out that not enough people are buying them. So they would like to know why. So they do an empathy map. And when you start the empathy map here, you can understand that the problem is you only know 2 things. If you're, let's say, a salesperson in a store, you know what somebody says to you, and you know what somebody does. And in this case, they found that many people were leaving without buying televisions, even though maybe they said, I like your TVs. So they were missing what's on the right. And some of the things that might be on the right would be, well, I really think, the customer says, I really think I need to do more research, or I could get a better deal some other place. What they're feeling might be fear that they don't know how to do this. They might be overwhelmed by all the products, and they may feel embarrassed that they can't make a decision. If you know all of these things, you can adjust how you sell TVs to meet the needs of the user.
And remember that buying a TV can be similar to trying to sell someone on a program of healthy behavior. So this applies directly to public health. The next step that we mentioned is define. You have to combine and analyze all this research that you have done, and you have to put it in human-centered terms, not focus on what you want as a business or as a public health professional. So an example is, instead of saying, we want to increase the signups for a food program by 5%, what you would actually want to say is, how can we help busy mothers provide healthy food for their families? And here's an example of defining a design challenge.
So we did this a workshop at UC Berkeley. We invited the California Poison Control System. That's a system that protects people from the dangers of poisoning. And they were concerned they were not reaching enough people. So their challenge to us and everyone at the workshop was, how might we get information out to 2 million people? We went through a lot of the steps we're describing here. And the short story is that those were applied, and they're doing much, much better today.
the next step, as we mentioned, was to ideate. And ideate is brainstorming to come up with ideas. And what's important about this is go beyond little adjustments. Make your ideas big. It doesn't matter if, at this stage, don't say, oh, those ideas are too big or they're not going to work. We want to come up with as many ideas, quantity over quality. Go around the room, discuss the ideas, etc. And at this stage, do not critique the ideas.
One example here is from China on a project I've been working with factory workers to try to improve the situation for them in the factories. And at first, the people we were working with, namely the government and factory owners, they said, well, how can you bring factory workers here to make decisions about how the factory works? Because what are they going to know? And again, we went through design thinking workshops for a year. And after that, the factory workers, you can see them here, they're coming up with problems and solutions using this method. And they came up with a lot of changes that were really terrific. The owners of factories, the government, it really made a lot of very positive steps.
And then finally, there are some steps that we're not going to be able to cover tomorrow in a workshop, but you're going to be prototyping to create a physical form of the object or of the program. You're going to be testing it, and you're going to see if you actually have made an impact on the problem. And in conclusion, we know that public health actually impacts all aspects of human life. And many of these problems, if not most of them, are complex, wicked problems. You need collaboration to fix these problems. And one way to do this is through design thinking. And as you can see, it will help us teach, learn, and apply these human-centered techniques so that we can improve the users and the end users, so that we can improve the health and healthy aging. So tomorrow's workshop will be, in just a quick summary, we have a problem statement that was suggested to us by Professor Kamige and Kabayama as part of what you in Osaka University are looking at, which is how might we support older adults in Japan, especially in urban areas, to access the government and community services for physical and social activities to help overcome social isolation. This is at the core of healthy aging. So this workshop will take place tomorrow. It'll be 3 hours. We will be working in groups from 2 and 5. They will have several exercises, a little bit like the one we did before, and we will have people report on those activities. So we will be keeping the timing. And here's the quick agenda. The introduction and icebreaker will define the problem, we'll create empathy, we'll define the problem, we'll ideate, and finally we'll do some debriefing so that maybe we can come up for some next steps on how we can introduce this concept so that we can all work together in the future. And this is a solution to the problem in France for wearing masks. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ron and Linda, for introducing us very, very exciting way of thinking. And we are looking forward to tomorrow's workshop. And first, does anybody have question or comment from Rose?
Thank you so much for the clear explanation and teaching about this topic. So I would like to clarify empathy map. So what's the difference between you and say or empathy map?
Sometimes these things seem very similar, but for example, a person buying a TV, what they might say to the person who's selling it to them is, oh, I really like your product. It's very nice. What they might end up doing is leaving. You know, they might say something like, oh, I need to think about it, and they leave. So you don't really know what they're thinking or what they're feeling, because that's very hard to know. All you know is what they said to you and what they ended up doing. And usually those two things are very different. One might say, oh, it's very nice, and then they leave. So you're confused. And this happens when we look at programs in public health. You might have people who don't want to say anything negative about the program, but they're afraid, they're confused, they're not sure, they don't know how to talk about their words. And so as researchers or program developers, we don't really know what's going on. And that's what we're trying to find out here. And empathy maps are very interesting and very difficult to do. You know, you have to really get close to the users and have their trust.
Well, we're gonna do one tomorrow.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Really fascinating presentation. And I really like the fact that you start with empathy. And I think that might be characteristic of people in public health as opposed to engineers, who I think begin with other goals in mind. But when you start with empathy and then you draw an empathy map, you wind up capturing ambivalence, which is generally the condition that people are in. And that's the thing that we have to wrestle with. And in order to approach that in an effective way, we need some sort of an ethic, preferably an ethic of care. I'm thinking here of like Joan Tronto's ideas about political arguments in favor of an ethic of care. And when you have that driving your activity, then I think it really resonates with a lot of people, and you're capable of drawing people into your actions. But I mean, many of us may be victims of design engineering. I mean, every time you use a website that doesn't seem very humanistic, or you find yourself thwarted in trying to accomplish something because some engineer who didn't approach from this point of view designed the thing you're trying to use. And so while I agree with you're borrowing this idea, I really want to praise the fact that you've improved it by starting with empathy rather than simply starting with the sort of mechanical purposes of the thing. So thank you so much for introducing us.
I wanted to comment on this because you brought up something very important that we all need to think about, and that is, what is your ethical foundation for doing anything? Research, any of the research we heard today, design thinking. And we had some students at Berkeley that took the design thinking model and they added something to it that started right before empathy, and that was to say what your philosophy is, to say how design thinking is going to advance health equity for all programs. For example, the Pacific Islanders, if you were going to do a program, you would want someone to make a statement. We want to include this group. We want to increase equity. So I think that could be an addition to the current model, is to build it out for ethics, for your ultimate goals of justice and equity.
Thank you very much. A wonderful presentation about the design thinking introduction. So I'm very looking forward. Okay, so some questions from chat.
There's a question from Malaysia that the person is very interested in to join, so can be accessed virtually.
Tomorrow is not really possible.
We'll wait.
Sorry. So tomorrow's real workshop for design thinking is from 2 p.m. At third floor, large conference room. So now it's scheduled participant is 17 participants. So we have more room if you participate in a design thinking workshop. So please stay to the bottom, please. Okay. Thank you very much. Wonderful lecture. Thank you very much, Professor Kabayama. Okay, so final session, session 3, group discussion part. I am Winston, same as the moderator, and it's almost time, so maybe short time final discussion. Okay, so almost it's a symposium is going to be closed. So final session is joint discussion total of this symposium and future aging research or present aging research and design thinking also. So if you have any question and comment about those issues, so please have question or comment, please. Okay. Oh, one question for the design thinking. So that's the leader model. So it's so to how to use design thinking. So we are doing to think about research project. So we are just regular thinking. But what is the difference in the regular thinking and the design thinking method to produce research project?
Okay, that's a very interesting question because it's hard to know when to do a design thinking for a problem you're thinking about. We're working on a project right now, which is about how to improve the situation of people who are exposed to smoke from wildfires. Very big problem in California. We have a lot of wildfires. And we have 40 million people who are exposed to this fire, smoke, which is very dangerous for your health. So we're doing a project for 2.5 years to do research about this and to come up with interventions. And we started the project first with about a year of doing background research. You know, what do scientists know about the problem? What are the interventions out there already? How are they doing? And then after a year of research, we had a design thinking workshop with different advisors. We found advisors that are typical of the kinds of people who would be concerned about this, all different kinds of people. We brought them all together in a workshop and we had a design question. So the question was how we could develop communication that would be more trusted by people and that they would use to reduce their exposure to wildfire smoke. Because in the research, we found that people often didn't know what to think about it. They didn't know how they felt about it. It was very complicated for them. They were very ambivalent, as Professor North would say, about the whole issue. And so we came up in that workshop with ideas to protect 4 very important communities. In our research, we found that people who are deaf or hard of hearing they were completely left out of this communication. We also found that farm workers, they work outside all the time. They have a lot of issues and they don't know what to do about it. And we had a group of the Hmong population, which is an Asian American group that lives in rural areas. They had big issues, but as Winston, who works with them, said, they're not involved in the discussion. So we came up with good ideas, and what we're doing now with the workshop findings is to start doing interventions with these groups.
Yeah, and I think even today, with several of the presentations that were done, they show great research and really interesting ideas. How are we going to go the next step? We talked about skeletal muscle and frailty, and you came up with some wonderful ideas about how to decrease the possibility of frailty. What are some of the things we need to do? And we already think we know where they need to be done. So the next step is, let's do a design thinking, get together specialists, physical trainers and research scientists, physicians, get them together and say, okay, how do we institute this in Japan, in urban population, in the community centers? And that's the problem where design thinking has really come up with some great ideas. Then you take them to the next step.
And you would want to bring in older adults who could benefit from better skeletal muscle mass and ask them, how do you feel about this? What do you think about this? What would you be willing to do if we had a program? Or you're in a program now, why don't you go? And so both of those things could be very helpful.
And I have a question. Sometimes the people who are very vulnerable, it's very difficult to reach them. And also the people who are surrounding them does not focus or notice their problem. How is there any way to get them to do together to reach them? Do you do anything to find the problem and reach them? That's a good way.
This is a very good question, because what you're doing is you're getting into the details of how you do design thinking. One of the things is you have to bring people together. So we had this problem in China when we started working there, because people would say, how are you going to bring the workers together? They never say anything in the factory. They're afraid. They're very isolated from the decision makers. So what we decided there was we did some workshops without the workers. We started out with some design thinking, but bringing other people together, people who know the workers, managers in factories, government health and social service workers. And then we went to one factory and said, they said, we'd like to try this project. And we said, we need a way to get the workers together. So they had workers, they said, are you interested in improving your life here? And if you are, we need some worker leaders. And so they got about 4 or 5 together. And then we went to visit them. But this was after a year of getting buy-in or approval from decision makers who normally made decisions about this. They said, we want to try participatory work. That could work here because we're failing. So that we all came, and the workers then, as a group, they were willing to come up with a few ideas, just 2 things that would be helpful in their lives and that they thought would improve the factory production too. They came up with ideas that were so good that the managers said, wow, we didn't know that. How come we didn't know there was a big problem here and this is affecting our whole factory? and the workers are leaving? And the answer to that is nobody ever asked them. So after this, then all the factories, we took on many factories, and they each had a worker group, and everybody got very comfortable, including the government leaders and the government and the factory managers and owners. They got very comfortable having workers come up with ideas and solutions. And so for your question, there is no program that you can't find a way to get people together. It's not easy. You have to think about what way might work. If you get a few people who, let's say you get a few older adults who are willing to talk to you, they can say, here's ways to get other older adults together. So you just have to kind of be creative.
So, all right. So time is really over. Okay. So thank you very much for the discussion. So just we close this symposium today. So final closing remarks from Professor Winston Sen, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Kamide. Certainly today is also a celebration of the 3-year partnership so far, and more to come with the issues of aging, which is a major issue for Japan and the United States and the world. And in learning a lot, Japan is the country with the longest life expectancy over the past few years about the innovations and the insights, the protective factors, the risk factors, and the challenges, but also successes in Japan, and also sharing our experiences in the United States. And also through some of the symposiums, we've also had insights from other countries around the Pacific. So really been a wonderful 3 years, but certainly more to come. And really lots of insights from the wonderful research presentations from the graduate students and postdocs today as well. Thinking about home medical care, issues of lipids on cognitive function and heart disease, muscle mass issues, COPD, respiratory dysfunction, mental health, and resilience. And certainly older adults, certainly as declining function, but also many might be also resilient with a community around them that helps to sustain, extend healthy aging. And that's the goal, certainly. And also thinking about, how do we move forward, continuing with thinking about participation. So not just doing research for research sakes, but for people who really need help or who really need their voices from the community to really be part of the process, perhaps having a community advisory board as part of the research projects. And how do we continue to engage them? And once certain research leads to good programs or interventions, continue to do evaluations to continue to improve. Kind of a sustaining long-term relationships between the university and the community. So lots more to look forward to. Really a wonderful presentations today. Thank you very much. So I close and end the International Symposium. Thank you everyone for participating today, in person and via Zoom. Thank you so much.